It's really essential, and it's amazing how many times students in my classes propose this as a response to the problems that we talk about in class. It's quite clear, if you spend any time at all talking about the problem of, for instance, fake news, or problems of privacy online, all kinds of other problems, that if people don't know very much about how the systems they are using work, they end up not using the systems but being used by them. And you can't defend yourself unless you have a critical media literacy. You can't participate in a democracy. You can't actually take advantage of the potentials represented by the technologies unless you have a fairly sophisticated understanding of how the technologies work and what they're all about. Well, I'll start with this last part, how they differ. The corporate counterparts in the mainstream media, if we want to call it that, are quite often well-trained professionals who understand a great deal about the world and about how things work, but no matter how much they try to apply a professional standard of ethics and how much they attempt to be independent, they are still working for corporations whose main job is not to serve audiences but to serve advertisers. And so even the best of the journalists are often caught in, I won't say conflict of interests, but they're caught in situations in which there are conflicting pressures and certain perspectives are inevitably going to be minimized in the system as a whole. I think there are good examples of professional journalists working for mainstream media here and there and occasionally able to present truly critical perspectives. But it's not the rule. As a rule, critical perspectives are marginalized, and most people who don't pay attention to the news all day, every day, working people who have, work to do, aren't going to end up being exposed to those perspectives very frequently. And this is why it's important to have what you're calling a truly free press. I might use different words because I think that implies an idealistic notion of what the free press can really be. I really like Stanley Fish's analysis of what a free press really means. His famous article that says there's no such thing as freedom of speech, and it's a good thing too, is quite important. Freedom of speech is a very valuable thing. Of course, everybody likes freedom of speech and everybody wants it, but the idea that speech or the press or the media can be free in some kind of absolute sense is not helpful ultimately, because no matter what kind of institution a journalist or a reporter or an editor or a producer is working in, there will always be material constraints on what they're doing. There will always be reasons why they need to do one thing rather than another. And in that sense, what we need is an alternative to the corporate mainstream media that is free from those particular pressures, but everybody who is in the audience, everybody who reads or hears or watches the content that's produced, always needs to understand that what they're watching is not some kind of truly free reporting that gives the absolute truth. Every perspective, every news content is always going to come from some perspective. And real media literacy is about understanding how to recognize the perspective behind what you are seeing or hearing or reading. And so an independent press is important, but I think we need to understand that as the importance of a system that provides a variety of different perspectives. I live in Canada, and we have what is more clearly a mixed system where there is significant public ownership of media. And the publicly owned media is not perfect at all. I think it does, in general, a better job than the privately owned media industries, although its TV network carries advertising as well, so it is not free from that perspective. But One aspect of media literacy in a country like that is to understand why there is a difference between what comes from private sector media and what comes from publicly owned media. So if you understand that, you're more media literate, and it allows you to cope better with different perspectives, and you can perhaps then also see what's missing from both. And if we had different kinds of media sectors that had different funding bases, perhaps things that were more tied to local communities, things that were in some way nonprofit, but not in the hands of a centralized state, we might see more perspectives. And of course, the more perspectives we see, the better we're able to put together our own picture of the world and make sense of the world in a way that meets our own interests. Well, people have been worried about civic engagement for quite a while. I should say, I mean, the changes that have happened in the United States are specific to the United States. I'm in Canada, I'm outside, I'm watching, but there is also, I think, a global tendency towards a kind of reactionary populism, and Canada is not immune to this. And so we're watching that there too. But this reactionary populism actually looks to me like a form of civic engagement. And the people on that side of the political spectrum often make the argument that a lack of civic engagement has been the problem, and that we need to get people up off the couches and get them involved and worry about like the rights that they are losing as the woke liberals take control, right? And so I'm not arguing against civic engagement. I don't want to say it's bad for people to get involved, although it's tempting to think that when you see who is getting involved and why they're getting involved and how. But what would be nice would be a civic engagement based on greater levels of informed citizenry and media literacy and so on and so forth. And this is the problem, I think, with some of the way the left has positioned itself as the possessor of a truth that's been hidden by the corporate media. And if only people would become critical of that corporate media, then they would realize they'd get angry and they'd get off the couch and they would get involved. This, for instance, is the kind of lesson that people take from the writings of Noam Chomsky a great deal. And while I have a great deal of respect for his work, I think there is something missing there because it tends to encourage a kind of skepticism. And of course, I don't want to attach this too closely to that particular theory, but what has happened has been a growth of the skepticism. And the skepticism has challenged a kind of civic engagement, but it hasn't gone the way we thought. And I think this is what we need to think about. This is what has been left undone, to use the title of today's conference. What's not been thought through is how to turn civic engagement into a specifically progressive direction, and not merely to mobilize people's anger and rage. I have a big collection of buttons that I've collected from demonstrations through the years, and one of them says, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And I used to think this was a great slogan until I realized that all kinds of people who support Donald Trump and so forth also think this, that the problem is a lack of outrage. And we need to do something other than mobilize outrage. Outrage is very easy to mobilize, especially through corporate social media platforms. It tends to profit from the circulation of outrage. And so we need to do something other than this. I don't have the answers. I don't know what exactly to do in order to mobilize something else. But I guess I try my best in the classroom. I don't know where else I can really do this, but trying to promote a critical media literacy that is more complicated than just, hey, you're being ripped off, hey, you're being oppressed, you should stand up for your rights. There's something more that needs to be done beyond just simply making people angry about what's going on in the world. We need to make that anger more effective at meeting people's needs and interests in a real socially productive way, a way that can actually meet the needs of everybody, that is inclusive, because it's not easy to do. I don't mean to suggest that like the left has been like bad at everything, because of course the right-wing people who want to mobilize outrage and put it behind Trump or whatever other kind of reactionary agenda are much more well-resourced and much better able to tap into the corporate networks that profit from mobilizing outrage. I don't know how to contest with that kind of power, but I do know that what we need to do is provide what we're talking about here in terms of media literacy in a critical sense. But we've got to understand that being critical is more complicated than just being angry about how much your individual rights are being violated.